It's a little reminiscent, possibly slightly inspired by Little Shop of Horrors. You know, feed me, Seymour. Okay, I'm so sorry for that. Hello, it's time for my June reading wrap up. I read 13 books this month, so I'm going to start off with the ones that I have not talked about in other videos already. Honestly, it's been a really good reading month for me. A lot of really good books just didn't quite fit into the narrative of the other videos I did. So I'm excited to get to talk about them now. The first book I want to talk about is called The Haar. It's by David Sodergren. This is probably my favorite book that I read all month. This was oh my goodness, I really enjoyed this story. The word Haar refers to freezing sea fog. So the title alone kind of sets the vibe before we even get started. It takes place in Witch Haven, Scotland. You have this elderly widow named Muriel. The home that she's currently living in was built by her husband, and she just has a lot of wonderful memories raising their family there together. She always intended to live out the rest of her life there. However, there are some American developers who decided that the area that she lives in is perfect for a golf course. They are basically buying people out of their homes. And some people gladly go. They make a lot of money, more money than they would have made otherwise. But Muriel just has a lot of memories there, and she misses her husband terribly. She's really resisting moving. This company is becoming increasingly aggressive, trying to get her to sell. She's very stressed. She's concerned that she will be forced out of her home. And then one day she goes for a walk near the shore. She finds this weird creature that she just assumes is some sort of sea creature, but it doesn't seem to be doing well, and she takes it home and tries to revive it back to health. This is not a normal sea creature, and things escalate from there. There is a decent amount of body horror in this book, but it does take you a little bit to get there. There's some build up to that. It is otherwise a very dramatic, romantic, heartbreaking, emotional story. You're really rooting for Muriel through all of this. Her late husband Billy, the way she talks about him, the way she looks back on her life, it's very touching and it's very sad. If I had a criticism of the story, I think the only thing I would say is that the villains, the American company, do seem a little bit like cartoon villains in the sense that they just really evil. The American company and the people who represent them don't seem to really have any redeeming qualities, and while that does help you not feel bad for things that may happen, and it does solidify you kind of taking Muriel's side, when I'm reading horror and the villain is a person, I do think that the best villains are the ones who think they're the good guys. If I had one criticism of this story, it's just that the bad guys seem a little one-dimensional. Despite that, though, I really enjoyed this story. I love the character of Muriel. For a horror story, it's always a really pleasant surprise to be genuinely touched at the same time as getting to enjoy the entertainment of all the horror elements in it. And plus, I just really like the setting, kind of nautical, like on the water type locations. The next book I want to talk about is called Seed, and it's by Ania Ahlborn. So Seed is about a man named Jack and his wife and 2 daughters. In the beginning of the story, they are involved in a car accident where everybody's okay, but it was a pretty serious accident. Their youngest daughter does start to act peculiar after this incident, though. And at first, they're not really sure if it's connected to the accident or not. She's just saying that she doesn't feel well, but her behavior becomes increasingly agitated and unlike herself. Her behavior escalates to the point of becoming increasingly violent. Now, this is a very young girl. She's maybe 4 or 5. I don't remember her exact age, but she's little. At this point in the story, what we find out is that the husband, has been keeping secrets from his wife. That basically he has a history of acting out in violent ways. He was eventually able to kind of move on with his life, but now it seems as though it's been passed on to his daughter, and something about this car accident just kind of triggered it to life. To me, it seems like a pretty clear metaphor for passing down mental illness. The idea of that sort of shame that you might feel because of the things that you struggle with, and as a result of that may hide evidence of it from your partner, straight up lie to your partner about it, and how devastating if you think that you've been able to successfully put it behind you and then see that it's actually been passed down to your children. It also has elements of witnessing history repeat itself. As a kid, if you struggled with drug abuse, or if you had a temper or something like that, and then you see your child struggle with things that you've already struggled with, just because you've been able to make it out the other side doesn't necessarily mean that they will. Sometimes people just can't be saved, and other times they can be, but not in the same way that you were. And so even if you've been through that, you might not know how to help them. And what a helpless feeling that would be. So this is another story that I found had very emotional touches to it. This has some supernatural elements. It does have gore, not overly descriptive. This was another one. I just really enjoyed it. We're taking a bit of a left turn here. So this is another audiobook that I listened to that I would not recommend unless you are familiar with the show Firefly. This is called Big Damn Hero, and it's by James Lovegrove and Nancy Holden. So if you are familiar with it, then just know that this takes place within that world. If you are not familiar with Firefly and you've never seen it, I would not recommend trying to read this book without that context. It was infamously canceled after only one season. They did come back with a movie called Serenity, but besides that, that was kind of it. But there was a really large fan base for it, so there have been other projects of people just wanting more of these characters, and this is kind of what this is. To try to give you a brief idea in case you're not familiar with it at all, is you have 9 primary characters who live on this spaceship. The captain of this ship is named Mal, and he is a very complex, layered character. So he and his crew are at a place where their priority is to be as independent as possible and to keep themselves in the sky. So they take jobs that might be completely legit, but they also might take jobs that are a bit sketchy. So in this book, they are taking on some cargo. The cargo that they're transporting is very volatile, so it is imperative that they are very careful and that they get where they need to go quickly. However, while they are on the planet picking this cargo up, the captain, Mal, is kidnapped. And so you have the drama of the rest of the crew trying to figure out how to get this cargo where it needs to go before it explodes, and also trying to get their captain back and figure out what's going on. Again, if you're not familiar with Firefly, I wouldn't start here, but if you're interested in sci-fi that's very character driven, it has like serious and dramatic moments, but it's also funny. So if you're interested in the show and you want to try that out, then if you like that, then try this book. It's a show that I liked quite a lot a few years ago, and this was just sort of a random listen that my husband and I decided to give a try. So I will say, as far as the narrator is concerned, he does a great job doing Mal's voice. As the overall narration of the story, and when he's doing Mal, he does a really good job with his voice. The women's voices are a little bit less convincing, but it is what it is. That it's hard to find someone who can do a very convincing man and woman's voice. If you are familiar with Firefly, I will just assure you that this is faithful to the source material. But the plot of this book takes place prior to the movie Serenity. I don't know if they would consider it canon, but I mean, at this point, it's been canceled for so many years. Does it really matter anymore? Not really. The next one I want to talk about is my other sci-fi book that I talk about every month. We are on number 5 of the Expanse series, Nemesis Games, and this is by James S.A. Corey. So this is a bit of a departure from the rest of the series because while every single book always has multiple perspectives, the one consistent perspective throughout is James Holden, the ship captain of the Rosinante. He has been the one consistent character through all of these books. Now, we have always known about his crew. They have a very small crew that they are able to keep their ship in the sky because they are all very good at what they do. For this book, we actually get all the perspectives of the crew. We have James Holden, the captain. We have Naomi, who is the XO and the engineer. We have Alex, who is the pilot. And we have Amos, who is the mechanic. So that is their roles on the ship. However, circumstances are such that the Rosinante is out of commission and it's going to take a while to get her fixed up. So you have our main characters going different places, doing different things, taking care of business because they can't be on their ship right now. And so it's the perfect time for them to take care of whatever unfinished business they may have. And it was so nice at this point in the overall narrative to get more background on these characters. We've known and loved these characters throughout all of these books, and there's always been this mysterious element to what happened in their pasts and why they are the way that they are. And so to finally get this opportunity to get the backgrounds of some of these characters, to see how they behave and who they are when they're not together, and a clearer view of how their relationships with each other affect their behavior. This story, Nemesis Games, is allowing us to delve into characters that we already know in a deeper way, and it's kind of a setup for the next book more than anything. It is a story in its own right, but I think that this is a more pivotal book in terms of within the narrative of the overall story, if that makes sense. I am so firmly lodged up this man's ass. This narrator, what is his name? I forget his name all of the time, even though I'm obsessed with him, and it's upsetting. I can hear his voice in my head, and I just can't think of what his freaking name is. I'll put it on the screen somewhere. I was just talking about how hard it is to get people who are very good at different gendered voices. This man is fantastic. His accents are fantastic. It really brings the story to life for me, and I've enjoyed it so much, and every single month I look forward to getting to start the next book in the series, and I'm going to be devastated when it's over, I'm sure. It continues to touch on the subject of loyalty and power, the hypocrisy of being willing to overlook things when it's your friend doing it, even though it's the same exact behavior as someone that you might demonize. How intimate can you be, like emotionally intimate, can you be with someone when you're keeping secrets? There's a difference between just having a little privacy for yourself and withholding secrets out of fear that people will abandon you or dislike you or judge you. And I guess the other thing is it does kind of touch on the dangers of a charismatic leader, and especially when those people do not have genuine friends around them. If you are surrounded by yes men who will not call you out when you're doing things wrong, you can become so dangerous to yourself and the people around you. And how the kindest, most loving thing you can do for the people you care about is tell them the truth. Tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. Because what you're doing when you don't tell people hard truths is you're not protecting them, you're protecting yourself. Because you're scared of them being mad at you. You're scared of them rejecting you. You're doing that, it's selfishly motivated. You're not doing that for them, you're doing that for you. It's interesting the way that this author, James S.A. Corey, has choreographed this in such a way where you never understood their relationships with each other better than when you see how they behave when they're apart. I love it so much. It's so good. It's a big time investment. There are a lot of books, but it does not feel like wasted time. I'm enjoying every second that I've spent listening to this series. And the last book that I have not talked about in any other video is by an author that I did talk about though. This story is called 100% Match, and it's by Patrick C. Harrison III. I'm really glad that I gave this author another shot with his other book because I thought his other book was much better than this one. But let's talk about it. 100% Match is about a man named Bart, and he's obsessed with statistics. He is trying to date, he wants a wife, and he is obsessed with happy marriages involve women who have this hobby, or women like men who look like this. And so he is trying to take advantage of all of this statistical information to give himself the best odds in finding a romantic match. However, the guy is real weird, and not because of the statistics thing. It's like he acts so prim and proper, but then does really gross things for seemingly no reason. Like, it's never discussed in the book what his motives are for the gross things that he does, but he works at a fast food restaurant and he'll do things like blow his nose and then put it in the food that he's like giving to people. Stuff like that. So as far as the horror elements in this book, it's definitely more of the grossness than anything else. It's not that I mind the gross, because I feel like gross can be very like cringy, and it can make you feel something, right? But for me, it was not particularly effective in this book because it really felt like it lacked description. The sorts of words that really make you like feel gross when you're talking about something like that just weren't there. And so when you're talking about hawking a loogie or blowing your nose or putting a dead bug in food, it doesn't have that much impact if you're just stating that it happened and then moving on. The premise was interesting enough as far as the being obsessed with the statistics and all of that, but there was no discussion of the motive for the gross things. And the grossness wasn't particularly entertaining to me because it really, again, he just stated it happened and then moved on, which maybe the intention of that from the author was because he was trying to showcase that maybe there wasn't any rhyme or reason to it, that the character Bart wasn't thinking about it. He was just doing this weird, gross stuff. I don't know, but it didn't have much impact on me, the things that were happening in the book. It's a somewhat amusing story at times, but it just really didn't make me feel anything. I didn't even really cringe. It wasn't my favorite, but luckily and thankfully I tried this author again, and now we're getting into some of the books that I've already talked about if you watched the other videos that I uploaded this month. Patrick C. Harrison III also is the author of Grandpappy, which I thought was a significantly better book. At least for my personal preferences, I enjoyed it much more. Grandpappy is about a man named Charles. His grandfather is on hospice. His parents are his grandfather's caregivers. Now, his mother and father want to go away on vacation, so Charles has agreed to go to his grandpappy's house, someone to be there while his parents are gone. There is a nurse and a nursing assistant who is coming in as part of the hospice to take care of his grandpappy, but he's there as well just to kind of fill in between. This story is a very unhinged fever dream. It's not a linear experience of events, but it's entertaining. It's gross. It does have sexual violence in it. It's gross. Did I mention that it's gross? Really, really glad that I gave this author a second shot. I also read a book called Butterscotch, and this is by Asia Brito Guerrero. Butterscotch is about a girl named Zia who wakes up at the side of a lake. She's injured, she's confused, she has no memory or recollection of what has transpired here. There is a house that she can see in the woods that she ends up going to because she doesn't know where else to go or what else to do, and realizes that the people in the house are connected to the bad things that happened to her. So this is another story where you have our heroine who is going through it, let me tell you, and you're rooting for her. It does have some violent elements, but this is another one that kind of leans into the gross factor a bit. But there is emotional elements to this book for sure. And the way that this character, her background and everything, you really feel connected with her. I would have really strongly recommended this book if it wasn't for the ending. I don't want to say it ruined the whole book for me, but it is something that affects the way you view the rest of the story. I can understand what the author was trying to do. It just wasn't for me. But I would be interested in trying the author again. I was very invested up until that point. I also read a book called No One Rides for Free, and this is by Judith Sonnet. Now, it is important to note that this book, which I did not realize when I read it, is part of a 10-day challenge. I felt like that showed a little bit that it was the result of a 10-day challenge, but I mean, that's still an accomplishment, so you have to appreciate what she got done in the time that she had. Jody is on a road trip with her 2 adult children, and she is dropping them off at college. She runs into a gas station, and while she's in there, a man gets into the car. He threatens her children, so when she gets back to the car, they're too scared to tell her that a man is there. He did not get into the car just because he wanted a ride. He just becomes increasingly volatile. This is very sexually depraved and violent. This unhinged man just making people do things. Judith's Sonnet knows how to write things that make you squirm. I'm very excited to read her again and find a book that wasn't a 10-day challenge so I can really see her shine, I think. Another really good book that I read this month was Bluejay by Megan Stockton. Bluejay is about a group of friends, Noah, Jack, and Phil, and they are all big fans of horror and gore. That is the thing that they bond over. They are constantly trying to one-up each other, who can show the grossest, most horrible thing. One thing leads to another. They end up going to this club that they are under the impression is a simulation of like a torture dungeon. They go there and find out the hard way that it is not fake, that it is all real. How do they react to this? What are they going to do? This is also a story that is deeper than just the good, gory, fun time. You see the interactions with these characters, with each other, the way that they relate to each other, the roles that they take on, and how it changes the confidence level. When shit hits the fan and you actually have real stuff going on and your lives are in danger, who stands up and actually does something about it, and who becomes the weak link? How you react to your friends when you feel like they're kind of dragging you down. So this was a very layered, interesting story. In the afterword, it kind of said this was her first foray into extreme horror. I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. We gotta talk about Mr. Otis Bateman now. I had a video earlier this month where I spoke about his book, My Vice is Your Unfathomable. My Vice is Your Unfathomable Agony. And I really enjoyed the book and I spoke highly of it. There was some missing context that I did not know. Apparently, he was allegedly caught abusing his influence to get nude photographs from readers and then sharing those images with another horror writer. His name escapes me, but I'll put it somewhere. So I'm not going to talk about this book again. I know that there are people who feel very strongly about separating the art from the artist, and I can respect and understand that. I do think that there's a bit of a difference between what you do in your spare time versus recommending someone to other people, especially if you're not going to provide that context, which I was unable to provide to you at that time because I didn't have it myself. But yeah, so I'm just going to kind of cut my losses with that author and move right along, you know. I liked the book. I didn't like it enough to overlook that. We have a book called Hollow Girls, and this is by Jessica Drake Thomas. Our main character is a woman named Olive, and we are jumping back and forth in time between when she was a young girl and she and her best friend Stacia went into the woods, and then only Olive came out. Stacia was never found, and so this is a traumatic event that has affected her life up into adulthood. As an adult, her father, who is a local historian who had been looking into people who had gone missing in the woods, he has now gone missing. So you have Olive convinced that the answer to finding her father is in figuring out what happened to Stacia back then. This is influenced by her belief that when they were kids, that they were genuinely participating in some form of witchcraft. This is one of those books where it's not super clear as you're reading it if there are truly supernatural things at hand or if this is just a traumatized girl. You gotta read to find out. You can really see how the loss of her best friend in such a traumatic way, especially feeling like when you're convinced that you have the answers in your head and you just can't pull them out. What a powerless feeling to feel like you should have the answers and you just don't. Next we have In the Valley of the Headless Men, and this is by L.P. Hernandez. This is about a man named Joseph who just lost his mother. He and his stepbrother Oscar are going through her possessions in her house, and that is when Joseph finds letters that his father had written him that his mother never gave to him. So he kind of had like a bit of a deadbeat dad. He would reach out but never show up. You know, like that sort of vibe. He wasn't missing anything by not seeing these letters, but in the final letter it mentions this forest, this national park called Nahani. So when he reads this letter, there's something different about it, and he just feels called to go there. And so he ends up taking Oscar and his ex-girlfriend, Jillian. Something about this location really brings previous traumas to the surface. It's a very whimsical, surreal book. When you're reading it, you are not clear what's real and what's not. The vibes, the mood of the book, it's just very ethereal. You are just desperate to find out. You are invested. It was a very fun read. I really enjoyed the essence of the book and how it made me feel as I was reading it. And I just like books that take place in forests. I think that they do have a way of making you feel small and powerless. This is another book where there's horror elements, but it's much more about the relationships that these people have with each other. Another just a really good read. I really enjoyed this one as well. And the final book to talk about is called The Spore Queen, and this is by Debra Castaneda. This was another book that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm very eager to read this author again because that's how much I enjoyed the vibes of this book. We have this man named David who has Lewy body dementia, and he lives on the edge of this forest where, after a big storm, this forest has become infested with mushrooms. And you see that after all of this has happened, people start going missing. You have this news reporter who comes to speak with him about the people missing in the forest, and in a shocking turn of events, she goes into the forest and then becomes missing. So a lot of the book has to do with the people who care about her, her parents and a coworker trying to find her. But the bigger plot of this book is about what is going on in this forest. Are the people dead, or are they under the influence? The visuals in this book are so visceral. You're picturing nature attacking back. Like, you are picturing being consumed by nature and the spores, the mushrooms kind of taking over and infesting everything. And this is another book where you're not sure what's real and what's not. You're not sure if this is just a purely natural thing where nature is taking over, or if there is something supernatural at play. I had so many fun books that I thoroughly enjoyed this month. It was a really good reading month for me. Fingers crossed that July goes just as well. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. It continues to touch you. Excuse me. Now, amidst I say that right? Amidst. That's what. While all of this is happening,